Hey, everybody. It's your pal Jay Stone, and we're back with another episode of Both Laugh, the Dying Scene Quarantine Chat Show. We're up to episode 54. And before we get into that, I just wanted to say thanks again to everybody who has listened to 1 or 53 or any number in between of our previous episodes. It's been a fun project over the last couple of years, and we're just going to keep rolling with it. We've got a bunch of interesting guests coming up for later this month and next month, and we're just going to keep the train rolling. We've also, as you may know, got some fun things coming on the dying scene front. Lots and lots and lots of announcements coming. If you have not followed us on Instagram or Facebook or I guess Twitter at Dying Scene, just search for Dying Scene on those places. You'll find us. We've teased out a little bit of what we've got going on. The website is being rebuilt. There is a Patreon page that's being launched. If you want input on how to join the team, or what you would like to see from us for content, or what you would like from a Patreon page, you can chime in on any of those platforms. We're happy to hear from you. And yeah, it's going to be fun. I promise you, it's going to be fun. So yeah, it's episode 54 of Both Laugh. And this is a little bit of a crossover episode. We teamed up with our friends over at Mable Syndrome, whom hopefully you're following on all of the normal social media and podcast platforms. And if you're not, pause this episode and go do that now. They're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on, I'm assuming they're on Twitter, and they're available wherever you can find podcasts. Mable Syndrome is run by Kristen and Jessica, whom I have known for years, since before their Mable Syndrome days. They launched a really cool project known now as Mable Syndrome. It's probably 6 or 7 years ago, and they built a community that is really geared towards women in the punk rock scene, because they are out there, dudes. It's not just a bros club anymore, nor has it really ever been, but they're doing a lot of work to sort of carry the flag for the women of the punk scene, and to make sure that those voices are heard and seen. And in regard to that, what we have teamed up for the month of March, which is Women's History Month, is a photo project. There's a lot of really great female photographers out there that, and there's a lot of really great female artists, obviously, in the punk scene. And so we're going to combine the two. I'll let Kristen tell you more about it in the episode, but it's episode 54. It's with Kristen from Mable Syndrome. Make sure you check them out, and make sure that you're following us, as I said repeatedly, on Instagram, because this is going to be it's going to be a really fun project. It'll run the entire month of March, and frankly, we may have more material than we have space for. So we'll have to come up with something cool to do after the month of March is over. But for now, episode 54. All right. So by way of introduction, let's just jump right in. It's episode 54 of Both Laugh, the Dying Scene Quarantine Chat Show. And this episode is a crossover episode, sort of like when the Power Rangers were on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or maybe more accurately in this case, when Urkel was on Full House meeting with Stephanie Tanner. I am a dork for those references, and I hope that you don't remember them. That's because we are joined this week by Kristen from Mable Syndrome. Kristen, say hi to the listener or listeners. Thanks for coming on.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, I've been on your show twice now, I think, officially. The first one was episode 3. And according to Facebook memories, that was 5 years ago today that it went live, which is wild.
Not crazy.
And here,
we're not the best podcast, but we're one of the first.
Exactly. That was sort of going to be my tagline for a while. I'm not the best podcast, but I'm a podcast.
Right. I've been out there for a while. Been doing it regardless.
Yeah, you're up to, by my count, I think Blake from Jawbreaker was number 98 or something like that.
Oh, nice.
Do you keep a list? No. I keep a list. Yeah. Of mine, not yours, but I just kind of scrolled through the podcast page, and if my math is correct, which is suspect at best, I think Blake was like episode 98.
That means we're coming up on 100, which is
awesome. That means you have to do something special.
Right. Maybe this will be it, because I already have 99 in the books.
Okay.
So then this would be 100.
I don't know if this counts. This is my show. Have you been on other podcasts? I should probably know this, but it's weird being on the other side, isn't it?
It is weird being under.
Yeah.
It's so fun because I didn't have to prep. I could just like come on and chat with my bud. So it's
Yeah, and
awesome.
this is a weird one to prep for because we've known each other for years now. And I was like, well, shit, I don't know what's like an official story and what's an unofficial story and what I
Right.
should talk about. It like sometimes it's harder to prep for an interview when you know a person.
That's true. Sometimes I'm like whispering things at a show, like don't tell anyone.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, you never know.
Can you believe that you're up to almost 100 episodes? Well, we'll back up. Let's give the people a little introduction to Mable Syndrome and what it is. It's a really cool website. It's a really cool podcast, and it has kind of grown into this really awesome community. But give the people sort of the background of when Mable started.
Sure. Yeah. So about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I was thinking about how I was one of the only women that I knew that really loved punk rock music and that was still going to shows. And I was going to a lot of shows by myself. When one of my favorite bands was coming into town, I would just go by myself. I'd kind of come late and leave early and, duck out the side door and didn't know anybody. And I decided that I wanted to find other women that were interested in punk rock. And um, I was thinking about who I knew, and you're in the face-to-face group
Oh
on
yeah,
Facebook,
yeah.
which I
And
love.
before that, on the old message boards on whatever server they
In
were. Yeah,
MySpace or something.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Jessica was on there, and she was smart. She knew what she was talking about. She was a diehard fan of Face to Face, and so am I. And she just seemed like the right person to reach out. And I said, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I want to do something for women and something to highlight women in the punk rock scene. And she was like, sure, sign me up. So together from day one, we set out to kind of do two things. One is that I had this thought that women could do more interviews and have a bigger voice in the scene. So write blogs about music, interview our favorite bands, that kind of stuff. And then I also wanted to create a community. So there is a Facebook community specifically for women. And I think we have 600, 700 members now, which is awesome. And they're women from around the world. And the idea is that we all have this in common and we can go to shows together, we can help each other, we can support each other. So Mable is the voice of women. And it's for any individual who understands why that might be important, right? So.
And it is important. And I think because we've talked before Mable was a thing officially.
Yeah.
And I think it dawned on me at the time that there wasn't that sort of thing out there. That there wasn't, I mean, there's certainly Dying Scene in the earlier days, especially. There's only like 3 of us now. But that is going to change, hopefully this summer. But in the early days, Dying Scene had a lot of women writers and editors, but there was never really a women specific place for people to, or that was centered on women, because we might have had a lot of women on the team, but it's guys like me that run Dying Scene basically, right? It's like guys that are now in their early or mid 40s. And we're a very narrow subgroup, a big subgroup in the punk rock scene, but we're not the only voice. So it was a really cool idea when I first heard you talk about it. I'm like, oh my God, why is that not a thing already?
Right. And thank you. I do have to say thank you for that, because there were a lot of questions getting started. It's not just jumping into it. Like I said, I was always the person that would come in late to the punk rock show, sing along to my favorite band, and then kind of quietly leave. I never met a band. I didn't know anybody in the scene. And meeting you was so helpful, because you would say, oh yeah, reach out to this person, or you should check out that person. And you really believed in us from day one. And so thank you for that. That was a huge help. And I'll never forget something you said to me.
Oh.
I know, right? Before its time, somebody had said something like, well, why do women need their own thing in punk rock? It should be inclusive. And I said that to you. I was like, why do we? And you said, it's kind of like the all lives matter thing, right? Like, that's like saying all lives matter. And so and I'll
Yeah,
never
yeah,
forget,
yeah.
it's like, yeah, women's voices do matter and do count, and we should have a place where that's important and highlighted. And so, um, obviously totally different scale, totally different thing, but it helped put that in perspective for me, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for doing that.
It's funny. The other thing that I saw on my Facebook memories, see, sometimes Facebook can have good memories. The other thing that came up today, obviously, it reminded me that I was on the Dave, who's the original head honcho and founder of Dying Scene. He and I were on Mable Syndrome 5 years ago. But another thing that I posted was because obviously February 28th is the last day of Black History Month, and people in the suburbs, right, sometimes like to say, well, when's White History Month? And well, it's like saying to me, that was like, it was always like saying, where are the, how come we don't have non-handicapped parking spots? It's like, how come we have handicapped parking spots, but not like, where are the non-handicapped only ones? That's the rest of the fucking parking lot.
Whole thing.
Like, right? So it's sort of, I mean, it's weird to mix analogies like that, I know, but it's the same sort of concept. Like most websites, most zines that you read back in the day, most record labels, most bands, frankly, or at least the loudest voices, were white guys like me for the most part, right? And so we could incorporate women, but I think to have a women specific website was pretty awesome. And it was like, oh shit, why was this never a thing before? Because it seems so obvious, right?
Right. Yeah, and the community part is one of my favorite things. I mean, I'll get emails from women all over the world that say, gosh, because of hearing from you guys I didn't think I could go to a punk rock show by myself, but I just did. And I got reinvigorated and, with punk rock music and in the scene, and I felt more secure. Or I found another woman, there was a post the other day that's like, who's going to Punk and Drum? Like, let's all meet up,
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that that I love the most.
How long did it take after Mable started before you realized that was actually happening? That there was that sort of a group building? Because you guys, if I remember correctly, you came out of the gate swinging, really. I mean, I think you had Bomb Pops as your first like episode #1 of the podcast or whatever.
Right.
So which is pretty cool. But like, when did you start to realize that you had this scene building, which may have been, obviously it happened organically, but it was also a little bit by design. Like that was sort of a goal. But how long did it take before you realized it was actually happening?
Well, there's two answers to that. The answer about the community was, we got an email from Julie in Belgium. I'll never forget. And she said that exact thing, that was like, I hadn't gone to a punk rock show in 5 or 6 years. My partner doesn't like punk rock. I'm a new mom. I just didn't. And I related to that so much.
Yeah.
And she said, and I finally went to a show by myself, and she met Lisa, she met a bunch of other women. And I was like, this is why we're doing this. And that was in one of the very first months of Mable Syndrome. And so that felt amazing. And then in terms of getting interviews and kind of having a voice in that regard, yeah, we came out swinging. We asked, and this is something I'll never forget too. We asked Jesse Michaels of Operation Ivy, and I couldn't find a video or an audio interview with him anywhere. And so, but I just asked, and I said, hey, we're women doing this. We have 3 or 4 episodes in the bank, but you want to take a chance on us? And he said, yeah, I do, because in the probably 35 years I've been doing this, not a single woman has ever asked me. And he said, so yeah, I want to do this with you guys. And so that's when we knew, like, we were onto something, and that this could be really cool. And we got a lot more yeses than we got nos. And it felt really good. And then I think it just kind of snowballed from there.
Did you get a lot of no's in the early days? Did you get people who didn't really understand like what the concept was or why it was even a concept?
No, but what I did get was some hesitation when I would first show up to an in-person interview, because I don't particularly look punk rock. I noticed, are you wearing a Stacey D shirt?
I am wearing my
I almost wore a Stacey D shirt.
That's funny.
I went with Bad Cop.
But, well, so we talked about the Quarantine 15 before we recorded. I have another Stacey D shirt, which is just bright yellow with bright pink letters. It says Stacey fucking D on it. And I don't think it probably fits anymore.
Right.
I think that was a few sizes ago, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Oh God, you're gonna have to edit this out. I forget what I was saying.
That's all right. I forget what I even asked.
Oh, I know.
Oh,
So
showing
because I
up to
don't,
in-person interviews. Yeah.
right, because I don't particularly look punk rock or whatever, sometimes I show up to an in-person interview and I felt like people were like, oh, here we go, another, local WBZ,
Yeah.
interview that I have to do with this newspaper that knows nothing about my band, knows nothing
Right.
about punk rock, is just interviewing whatever band's coming to town this weekend. And so I got some of that. And then a few questions in, and so one particular person was a little off-putting at first. He was just kind of rude, and I was like, but I just stuck to my guns, and I was like, no, I know your band, I know you, I know punk rock, and here's
Right.
my questions, and they're good questions. And in the end, he found me at the show later and apologized, because he realized,
Interesting.
yeah, because he realized. So I think sometimes, and I noticed that people would change their tune when I would say things like, I'm 44, I've been in punk rock
Yeah.
for a very long time,
Right.
and I know my stuff, and people would change their tune a little bit too. So it wasn't so much that, I mean, we've gotten some no's. One person that I want to get on the podcast so bad is Erin Burkett
Yeah.
of Fat Records, and she's
Yeah.
turned us down a couple times. So if anyone knows Erin out there, tell her to be on our podcast.
Come on, Erin. I always got the sense that she doesn't necessarily like to be
Right.
in the limelight, or doesn't like to be the focus of attention.
I
But
don't think it's
I
personal.
think that would be fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be amazing. So certainly there are people that we'd love to have on that it's just not their thing, or whatever. But yeah, we didn't get many no's early on, which was amazing.
That is a weird thing about looking punk rock, isn't it? Like, and how, as much as we like to pretend that punk rock is this broader thing and that it has like its sort of tentacles everywhere, like you still do get judged weirdly by the punk rock looking people for not looking punk rock, right? Like we like to be all about like inclusion and whatever and not labeling people, but then if somebody doesn't have Liberty spikes or like, then well, you're not really a punk. Like I do think, I think the very first interview that I showed up to do in person, this years and years and years before the podcast was a thing, because I told myself forever I was never going to be a podcast guy, because I'm a middle-class white guy with a beard. Like we all have them. It's birthright, I think. But one of the very first interviews I did, I think I came from work. So I was wearing like khakis and a button-down shirt. And I won't say who it was with, but we sat outside a coffee shop. And it was a really great conversation. And the other person looks punk rock. And I decidedly don't really, especially when I am coming from work. And so I think it was the same sort of thing, that we had this good conversation, but it took a minute to sort of like break the ice. And we had known each other, but mostly social media and casually and whatever. And that was the first time really sitting down to talk. And I think that you're right. There is that little sort of label thing that if you don't have knuckle tattoos or neck tattoos or Liberty spikes, then you don't look punk rock. So
right.
but then you start to ask like
punk rock
good
to
questions.
not look punk rock?
Well, that's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. If we're all about bucking trends, like,
right,
why have Liberty spikes?
Right. And,
Plus
and I understand too, when people are on tour, because we used to do more in person than both of us, than Zoom, which is the kind of the norm now. But I understand people are on tour, they're tired, they've talked to Sally from the newspaper before, and they're just over it. And so I totally get it. I've never had, knock on wood, I've never had a bad experience at all interviewing anyone. So
yeah, I think that's because you get it and you care. You know what I mean? Like you care about the subject matter, because you're not just interviewing them because they're on a list of people to be interviewed and to check a box. You interview them because you actually like them and you have interesting insight into, or try to get interesting insight into who they are and why they do what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we only book people or interview people that we like you said, like people that we will stand behind, that we will put up on our website. And we've had to take some stuff down,
Yeah, we've had to take some stuff down recently.
yeah, it stinks, but
yeah, you like to think that you get one right, and then every now and then, somebody does something scumbaggy, and you're like, well,
Yeah.
But then there's also that sort of push and pull about like, well, how scumbag, like where's the line of scumbaggy? And then that's caused some interesting conversations recently and in the distant past.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on our podcast. And Jessica and I are kind of on the same page that we our attitude is that, you know, we'll listen, we want to take in as much information as we can and get kind of maybe hear both sides or hear, you know, get the full story or what, as much as we can, and then make our own personal decision, you know, about what we feel is the right thing to do. And everybody has their own line to draw, and we don't judge people who have a different line, you know.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where people are coming from. You don't know what information they have that I don't have. It's such a complicated thing. And I think we all have to be okay with everybody else's line,
Yeah. Right.
you know?
Up to a point. I mean, I think we all have our lines, and I like to think that mine are pretty liberal, which I don't use politically. I mean, I think my scale is pretty wide, but I do have my lines. You know, like Nazis aren't ever good, you know, like sexual assault is bad, like that's not a line we're going to cross, you know. So I don't know. Seems such an I will guarantee you that there will people, like if they hear that, will be out with pitchforks. It's such a weird thing, like
So
trying to gatekeep against people. Like it's such a weird thing.
yeah.
Sometimes it makes you not want to do it or wonder why you do it, you know.
Right. And you and I deal with the same thing with these trolls on social media. You post one really what you think is a good thing, like, you know, stand with Ukraine or something, and then you get the guy that's like, I stand with Russia, or you know,
that's a
whatever
weird,
it is.
that's a weird
You know,
thing.
Down with Nazis. Well, not all of them are bad. Whatever it is, it's
Yeah.
just, you know, you get these silly people on social media. Do you block people if they, or do you delete comments, or do you just kind of leave them up there so they look like an ass?
There may be people, well, there are a couple. I mean, I'll delete the ones that are obviously spam, like like follow us for 8 million more likes or whatever the fuck. Like I'll delete all those because I don't know, it's garbage. But by and large, I don't really delete the other ones because I think that sometimes if somebody makes a comment and then enough other people sort of chime in and tell that person why they're wrong, they tend to delete their own comments. Particularly when people know who they are, and then they can't really hide behind the anonymity of being online anymore. Because we don't, I mean, I feel like with Instagram, especially, Twitter's a different animal, but we don't have much of a Twitter presence, thankfully. But I feel like with Instagram, you don't really have the same sort of anonymity that you do with Twitter, where you can just have a black dot as your avatar and have a bunch of random letters and nobody knows who you are. I feel like on Instagram, it's a little bit more personal. And then, so you do have to take accountability for what you say. So I feel like most of the time, I can't think of a time, I should say, where I've deleted anything that somebody else wrote. We've pulled posts about bands that turns out they were sort of scummy recently. But yeah, I don't think I've blocked commenters or anything like that. I haven't. There may be other people in the dying scene tree that have, but I feel like sometimes when they get attacked for having such shitty attitudes, like sometimes that should weeds itself out.
Now, do you think this is turning into me interviewing you? Sorry, but I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
But oh, now I forgot my question. But do you feel like you've met more? Obviously, you've met more wonderful, awesome people through punk rock and artists and that kind of thing. But have there been some that have changed, that you've changed your tune about? Like you used to really like them, and then hearing about things made you change your opinion of them?
Yeah, there have been a lot of them.
Yeah.
Let's see, how long have I been doing Dying Scene now? Dying Scene itself started in 2009. I think that's when Dave launched it initially. I started as a reader and then started writing for the site in 2011. So that's 11 years now, because it was January of 2011. So that's 11 years now. In that time, I would say, I don't know, probably 95% of my interactions with people have been positive.
Yeah.
I think that there are a growing handful, and so maybe it's now two hands full of people who I would have vouched for a time, both personally and professionally. And then it turns out the more you learn about them, or not even the more you learn about them in the past, but the more they reveal themselves in the present, that sort of changes your attitude about them. I think especially the last couple of years has made people go crazy. Or maybe not go crazy, but maybe certainly push them in a direction they might have been leaning anyway. And I feel like a lot of weird battle lines got drawn when it came to vaccinations, and when it came to mask wearing, and when to hold shows, and and these really weird battle lines started to get drawn. So there are some people, especially the last couple of years, for reasons around that I've had to be like, nope, I'm going to disengage from that person. It's not fun. It's not like, maybe when this blows over, you know, when you get a little more oxygen to your brain, like, because I mean, we all feel like we're right? So even though I know that I am, but I feel like everybody thinks that they're right in every situation. But yeah, there have been people, both for those reasons and for before, sometimes people you like, and then you realize that all those little quirks that they had, they were actually problematic, and you totally just fucking missed it. Right. Like, and sometimes people reveal themselves months or years after you meet them. So there are definitely people that I won't cover anymore. There are definitely people that and that's not to say other people can't, but that means like that's outside my purview now. There's people that I won't talk to, won't engage with, won't, that's again about drawing lines. But yeah, it's always frustrating too, right? It's always because it's always the ones you least expect, which is exactly why it's bad, right? Because if you expected them, you wouldn't have been friends with them in the first place. If you expected that guy's kind of a creep, you wouldn't have said he's kind of a creep, but I love him. Like,
right.
You'd say no, that guy's
He's
a
kind of
creep.
It's no surprise that he did
Yeah.
that. I was never friends with him anyways. He was kind of creepy.
Yeah, most of those people, like when allegations come out about certain people, you're like, well, yeah, obviously. But then some come out. We'll use the stolen wheelchairs thing as an example. I don't mind talking about that because I think that there's a lot of people who, for those that don't know, just Google stolen wheelchairs. You'll find plenty of information on there. But I thought that they were sort of a promising upcoming band, and even if they weren't necessarily my speed musically, I think that they, the younger two especially, showed a lot of potential, and they were kind of like this voice for a younger, grittier punk rock generation that really I don't think has existed in a while. Like a lot of the people that, if you go to punk rock shows and real like street punk shows, it's all people that are older than me for the most part, which is a weird thing. But it seemed like there were finally some younger kids doing that thing and carrying that flag. And even if it's not necessarily my speed, like it's cool that there's that young blood out there. And then to have really just vile, disgusting behavior come out, it's like, well, swing and a miss on that one. Like, boy, I had high hopes for that one. But and who knows, maybe the individuals involved can have their come to Jesus moment someday. I don't, hopefully.
Well, they put the nail in the coffin with their apology too. I think
they always do, don't they? And that's not specific to stolen wheelchairs. That's of anybody that has had any sort of transgressions. The apology almost never makes it better, right? It's the apology is like, wow, you misread this entirely, and actually made it worse for yourself instead of better. Yeah, that I think there were even a couple apologies in that one, and one got taken down, and then one was longer, and then it was like I threw other people under the bus. I'm like, guys, boy, have you not been paying attention for the last 2 years, right? Or 3 years, or however long that we've had this real sort of sea change, not just in our scene, but I think in the wider spectrum, in the entertainment world and whatever. Like, have you not been paying attention for the last few years? Like,
and it's something that I want to do more with Mable too. My professional life is that I have a master's in counseling, and I want to do more. I don't know how to say this without sounding condescending, but like helping bands if they get in any kind of sticky situation, maybe not like, we're not talking sexual assault or
Right.
illegal, but maybe if they get in a sticky situation, if they want a woman's perspective or opinion, or like some counseling around it or something like that, I don't see why Mabel couldn't kind of do a little bit of that for people or bands too.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting, because I mean, there are places, obviously, if you have drug and alcohol issues, there are places that musicians especially can go. There are places both locally to us, because we're both in Massachusetts, there are places locally that people can go, and sort of nationally through agencies like Music Cares and things like that. But there is, so if those are your problems, right, you can find help for it. If your problems are more mental health related, there are still places you can go. Look, Punk Rock Saves Lives is a cool organization that'll help point people in the right direction. But sort of those other missteps, there's not really, I mean, it's such a weird sort of area that there isn't anything like that. You're right. And I don't even know what it would look like necessarily.
Yeah, I don't totally either. And it wouldn't be me like giving therapy to
Yeah.
or bands or things like that. That would be out of my purview, but it would be more, just to consult with them maybe, or to say, here are some resources for you, or here's what I think you might want to do, right?
Here's why what you did is wrong, and here's how to look at it differently
Potentially,
to
yeah.
helpfully atone for it. Yeah,
Right.
that's an
Because there
interesting
are
idea.
some ways that, because cancel culture, I believe, has gotten a little out of control too. And so there might be some middle ground where there is some behavior that was bad behavior, but can be atoned for, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, I have very
There's a
different
lot
opinions, I think, on
cancel
cancel
culture.
culture and whether it is even a thing or even exists or whatever.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
but to me, there's a difference between cancel culture and like consequences for being a shithead. Like, and so a lot of them, first off, there aren't very many people that seem to have been canceled,
Right.
like that disappeared completely. I can think of maybe a couple, and I'm not just talking about in our scene. There's a couple in our scene, but I think even wider across the entertainment industry, there aren't that many people that get canceled. There, so I don't know. To me, that's I agree with you in principle, but
Yeah.
I think that cancel culture itself probably doesn't really exist, and there aren't many people that haven't been unduly canceled or given second or fifth or 87th chances.
Right. That's very true.
I think that it may happen a little more in our scene because I feel like there are less avenues out there for people to actually get their info. Let's look at somebody like Louis C.K. or Dave Chappelle, who have both been canceled and had Netflix specials and made millions of dollars on their Netflix specials after being canceled. So did they get canceled? Right. But there are other avenues for them to, whether through podcasts or through Joe Rogan or whatever, to sort of still talk to their audience. It might be a little different in punk rock because there aren't as many avenues for people to connect with people. So if there's only 2 or 3 or 4 main punk rock news websites or whatever that people go to find out what's going on, and a couple of them are like, no, we're not going to talk about that band anymore, then maybe that's a little cancel-y, I guess. But I feel like it also doesn't happen to people that haven't earned it.
Right.
Yeah.
And wondering, like, and like you said, I that's an interesting concept, that like cancel culture doesn't even, or the canceling doesn't even really exist, because it's not we're saying you're canceled and we have control over what everyone else does. I could say, for Mable Syndrome, I don't feel comfortable representing this person or having this interview up, and you might, and I totally respect that, or vice versa, whatever it is. So it's not like we're saying, no one is saying a particular person is canceled. We're just saying, for us, this is what we've decided. And I think because we're such a community in punk rock, we're like a family, and bad behavior just isn't going to be tolerated,
or at least gets pushed to the margins. And then I guess some of those people, but even still, people can find, I don't want to name names because that'll get me in trouble. I almost did that I had Tuna from the band Sweat, hardcore band out of California, on the other day. And there were a couple of times where she and I both like caught each other, like, might not actually say this, at least while we're recording, but I feel like people still find an audience. There are people who are way outside the purview of what I would cover or feel comfortable covering or want to give a voice to amplify, but they still find a way.
Yeah.
They talk amongst themselves. They have their own podcasts and whatever, and that's fine. But yeah, I don't know that cancel culture exists, but that's going to get into a way too probably philosophical conversation.
Right.
Who to get? I would like to keep an eye on time, just because we could just shoot the shit for hours and not actually talk about the project. But before we talk about the sort of Women's History Month project, to get a little back into Mable, who was the first guest? Was it Jesse Michaels? You sort of touched on it already, that made you go, wow, we're actually onto something here. Like, this is really cool. And do you still get those moments like 100 episodes in? I know they haven't all been interview episodes, but like 100 episodes in, do you still get those moments like, holy shit, I get to talk to Blake from Jawbreaker?
Blake, I was just gonna say Blake from Jawbreaker, and sometimes we have little breaks here and there, right? Because Jessica had a baby and Sarah took over for a little bit, and then she had to bow out, and I have a kind of a seasonal job that's really tough in the fall. So anyways, we kind of have these times where we've had some down times and things. When you've been doing it for 6 years, that just happens, right? But and then when we come back, we do feel a sense of excitement again, and then there are some guests like Blake from Jawbreaker where it was like, oh my God, we're talking to Blake from Jawbreaker, And he said the same thing. He said that Adam checked the DM. We just sent him a DM on Instagram. And he said, Adam checked it, sent it to him and said, hey, you want to talk to these girls? Because they're girls, because he was like, you were the only people that were girls and we've never talked to girls. So we figured, yeah, we'll talk to you. It'll be an interesting experience. That's what he said. And
well, especially for a band like Jawbreaker. And I feel like even for Jesse Michaels from Op Ivy, I feel like, I mean, punk rock is sort of stereotypically male anyway, but I feel like, and you talked about it especially in the episode with Blake, you talked about that, like, the people that love Jawbreaker are dudes. Like, there might be girls who like Jawbreaker, and that's not to minimize that, but like the people that show up and cry at those shows in the front row and whatever, it's dudes. And so that's been probably their experience for 30 years, or I don't even remember when Jawbreaker started. It was because I was like 4, I think.
Right.
But that's probably been their experience, is probably talking to guys like me. And so when I request, sometimes it's like, well, why does this guy want to talk to me? Like, what am I gonna? I'm just another 40-year-old white guy. That's probably what you've talked to for the last 25 years. But
you're completely different, and you have a completely different style, and you know your shit, and you're smart, and everybody knows that they're going to sit down with you and have a good interview. Totally different.
I hope that's the case. I like to tell myself that's the case.
Well, you should.
It is a little different doing a podcast style. Like it gives it's a whole different feel, which is the way that you guys have been doing it forever. And even though, what did I say? This is episode 54 or something like that. Most of the first 140 probably of the interviews that I did were all things that I just transcribed and then wrote into stories. I like to pretend that I'm a writer. And so to not have that as an outlet anymore, it's either jump to a different website, because for people that don't know, Dying Scene shat the bed a couple of years ago. It is being rebuilt at great cost, and there will be more on that to come this summer, spring really. But it's a very different skill set to have a conversation with a person that people are just going to listen to, and that is not only going to be heard by you while you're transcribing it, and you can edit out all the uhs and ums, and when you ramble and get off track, like, you just cut that shit out and nobody ever knows it happened. So it's a very different skill set to do it this way. And I'm still, I don't know, feeling my way through it 55 episodes and 2 years later.
Yeah, it is a different skill set. It's fun, but you have to be on your toes a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
And I cut out a good majority of our ums and our uhs, and so I say so a lot.
I have only very recently started cutting out things, because there were a few things that got talked about that probably maybe shouldn't have been talked about necessarily, where there was like future tour dates and things like that. So very rarely do I cut entire chunks out. Yeah, I don't know, because I like to have the conversation. I think that people enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, I think so too.
Um, so let's talk about the Women's History Month thing. So this was a really cool idea that you approached us with, and I'm happy to volunteer Dying Scene in our audience as a thing, because I think it's a really cool idea. So tell people what the idea that you, as you pitched it to me, was.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this was Lindsay McGuire's idea to begin with. She is
Shout out to Lindsay.
Shout out to Lindsay. She is photo Lindsay and then an underscore on Instagram. And she is a photographer that does portraits and all sorts of things, but she has amazing punk rock photography. And she thought it would be interesting to highlight female photographers for Women's History Month. And that's, of course, we're totally down with that. And then we thought, well, how about female photographers? And the subject of the photos is also a woman. And we thought, double down, let's go, you know? And then we wanted to fill in other women photographers too, like kind of bring them into the mix. There's so many amazing ones out there. And there's actually, since you go in the photo pit a lot, would you say it's more now than it used to be? Would you say it's one for every 5? Like how regular is seeing a woman in the photo pit?
I will say that it's probably a little more common now, maybe the last 4 or 5 years or so. I will say that the new people that I find in photo pits, mostly throughout the Boston area, but even broader than that, because I've traveled for shows at times, I will say that the newer people tend to skew more heavily female. Which to me is a really cool thing, because like, and I can shout out any number of local male photographers, and we all have sort of a crew, because you know it's a small scene and there's like 4 or 5 of us that shoot all the same shows, so 4 or 5 times a year we see each other in the same photo pits and whatever, and it's cool. It's a little fraternity sort of that way. But I think that the newer people that you see that are doing really cool things photography wise tend to be women. There aren't really, in my experience, at least the last couple of years, I say couple of years before COVID, that's been my experience, is that there's more really cool female photographers
but I wonder,
than there were. I don't know why, but
yeah, I wonder if they stick with it, you know, like if they're new, because
that's a good
a
point.
lot of them don't stick with it, right? You know, that's one of the things we want to make sure, is that women feel safe and supported. And doing Mable Syndrome has not been without a lot of challenges and a lot of negativity, and mostly from other women. And so you just,
interesting.
And we've had to develop really thick skin, you know, and it's
well, so what sort of, is it criticism, or is it like, what sort of flack do you get from other women in the scene?
Yeah, it could be anything, like we're not diverse enough because we're two cis white women that run Mable Syndrome, right? So we're not diverse enough, or we don't. Yeah, that's or
I've gotten that one too. I will say, yeah, especially doing this show. I have tried at times to make a conscious effort to think outside of interviewing just people that look like me and sound like me.
Right.
It has definitely been a blind spot for me. So yeah, that's valid.
Well, I think if we grew up on 90s punk rock, right? Like, I mean, it's just what we were accustomed to. And so it's hard to break out of that bubble a little bit. But we certainly tried to. We've had trans women write for us. We've had gender conforming individuals on the podcast, and also write blogs for us, and people of color write blogs for us and be on the podcast. Like, you know, we try very much to be as diverse as we feel, you know, we are in our hearts, and keep it open. But we've had trolling from some women. One group kind of splintered off, and then they tell on us sometimes. They told on this other group that we stole one of their merch design ideas, that just, it was totally organic how we came up with this design, and then it kind of resembles this other one, that was
Yeah.
out before ours, and they decided to like tell on us. It's just some childish stuff that's gone on. And so yeah, you have to have really, really thick skin to do this for sure. And I forget where I was going with that.
Couldn't tell you. I don't remember what I even asked.
Oh, that's so
I'm
funny.
such a wonderful
Oh,
host.
women in the photo pit.
There you go.
Because my question is, yeah, do they feel enough support? Do they feel like they're important enough in the scene that they're sticking with it, or is it constantly new women because they're not sticking with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to think back to the before times, right? Because I've probably only shot 5 or 6 shows really since COVID started a couple years ago. But I feel like the first, maybe, what was the first show I shot? It was probably back in 2013. So I was older at the time. I wasn't a young kid when I started shooting shows, and I haven't been doing it for a million years, even though sometimes it feels like that when I wake up the next day. But there weren't very many women at all. So it's not like, in my experience anyway, it wasn't like I was in photo pits with women who sort of phased out or gave it up or whatever. It's like I wasn't in with any at all.
Right.
But I do feel like the last handful of years that's gotten better, and that frankly that there haven't been many new younger guys that have gotten into it for whatever reason. There's the same crew of, like I said, 5 or 6 of us especially, but I feel like locally there haven't been that many new ones, which to me is fine, because again, how many middle-class white guy points of view do you need? Like, and there are some amazing male photographers in this area, don't get me wrong, but like, it's cool to see other perspectives and other points of view as well.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and sometimes, and so hopefully they feel like they're included in the scene and they feel like they're a part of it. And I feel like the guys, at least that I share photo pits with, tend to be pretty good. I could have a completely wrong read about this, but I feel like the guys that I share the photo pits with and am closest with from that world are pretty positive about like pumping up the female photographers too, and sort of extolling their virtues, because it's different. It is different.
Yeah.
Like the point of view is different. The sort of focus of the art is different. And so it's like, yeah, it is very cool. And it's a very awesome thing that I feel like has legitimately been growing the last couple of years prior to COVID. So hopefully that will continue.
Yeah.
If we ever actually get back to normal, or just pretend that COVID isn't a thing anymore, which it feels like it's more realistic.
Kind of where we're going. Yeah. And I do have to say, I don't think Mable would still be around if it weren't for awesome men that helped us out and supported us along the way. You being one of them, Sal being another one.
Sure.
Sal's amazing. He's been a huge support of Mable. And Danny Thompson was the first one. He's the drummer of Face to Face, and he's the first one that said, "You guys should do a podcast." And we were like, "No, I don't think so."
Right.
And he said, "No, really, and just to have somebody with some clout, with some credibility, say to us, I believe in you and I believe you can do this, means a lot, and we all need to do that for each other."
Yeah. And I feel like, to go a step beyond that, you can do this, it's almost like you should do this. Like somebody should be doing it. Somebody should be either carrying this flag, and it should be somebody who knows it and loves it, and isn't just like, nobody gets into punk rock for the paycheck, right? So you have to have some sort of a passion to it, whether or not you've got forehead tattoos and shit. Like, you have to have a passion for it, but that not just that you can do it, but that you really should be doing it.
Yeah.
Which frankly, and I think if we were to ask the 2 other guys that I'm sort of spearheading the resurrection of dying scene with, that's kind of our motivation too. Like, somebody should, because outside of, I mean, the media landscape is different than it was 12 or 13 years ago when the site really started. But there does seem to be, the website started because there was sort of a void in original content and news around punk rock. Yeah, punk news is a thing, but it's sort of a different animal. And so since the site went away, I feel like there's a void of the sort of stuff that we used to do. So I don't know.
Good.
I feel like somebody should be doing it. So yeah, that's the long way of saying that for the month of March, what we're going to do is Dying Scene and Mable Syndrome teaming up to focus on women photographers shooting women subjects, which I would imagine, because I went through, just when you pitched the idea to me, I said, well, how many women have I shot in my career? And it is a small fraction of the shows that I have actually, because if we were to say internally amongst Dying Scene that like us dudes that shoot shows, like let's put together a list of the women we've shot. A, there might be something a little creepy about that, but B, it's like it pales in comparison to the amount of dudes that we've shot. Like we could do for, was it No Shave November or whatever, where guys grow beards? Like we have more probably material of just dudes with beards than we do of like women in bands, aside from the awesome but the real popular ones, like Bad Cop, the Bomb Pops, bands like that, Against Me, War on Women. Like we cover the big ones, but it's nice to give voice to the people that we miss, because we miss an awful lot of them.
There's so many, I don't know how else to say it except hidden gems, right? There's so many hidden gems out there that we want to promote, and these photographers too, we want to give them, you know, the credit that they're due. And so, yeah, I think this is going to be awesome. We're going to do a post a day. So we have our work cut out for us. But
yeah, I feel like it seemed at first that a post a day, wow, that's 31 because it's a long month. And are we gonna, but then it's going to be like, oh shit, we're going to run out of places. Like it seems very quickly to have gone from, wow, 31 seems like a lot, to, oh shit, 31 might not be enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is good, which is a great problem to have. And I will tell you that I just the last week or so in doing this project have learned of women photographers and women bands that I had never heard of before because they weren't on my radar, and that you go, holy shit, they're amazing.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. And I'm glad that you thought of us as a place to partner up with. It's pretty cool.
Of course. Yeah, no, you get it. And you're awesome. And I love Dying Scene, and it just made sense.
So check out, we'll do them mostly on Instagram. I don't know that we've officially talked about that part, but mostly on Instagram, right? I mean, we can certainly get into the other social media, but Instagram seems like a place for that because all the photographers have their stuff there and it sort of fits that format. So check Instagram. It's going to be really cool. It'll be for the whole month of March. And then who knows, maybe we'll have to do a second one because we missed so many. And if we missed any, it is clearly because it was just, we didn't have enough room. It's not because of like oversight or we forgot about that band. It's like, holy shit, we're kind of getting overwhelmed with really cool photographers and musicians.
But also feel free to let us know, because I think what I want to do is at the end of the month be like, here's who we missed. Yeah. Because there are so many, and even announcing it today, people were put on my radar I didn't know.
Exactly.
And I wish there were more than 31 days that we could highlight everybody, but it's just there's just more awesomeness out there than there are days.
Yeah, it means that we'll have to come up with a different concept for next year.
Right.
Because you'll still be doing Mable Syndrome, and Dying Scene theoretically will be rebranded. We've paid enough money, so it should have been resurrected by then. If it's not, we're fucked.
I want to throw out the Instagram handles of a couple ladies that are
for sure
spearheading this. So Photo Lindsay, so she's at Photo Lindsay and then an underscore, and that's Lindsay McGuire. And then Courtney Ware is at CFH Courtney. So that's COURTNEY. And then Meredith is at Meredith Goldberg Photography. And so you can follow each of them individually, but you'll be seeing their photos, their artwork this month.
Yeah, and I feel like they sort of capture a really interesting cross section of the scene too, because they're in different places. So they have access to different bands and different venues, and they have different styles. So it's going to be really cool. So follow all of them because they're amazing, and you don't need me to tell you that. All right, thanks for doing this. That's episode 54. That's a wrap.